Welcome. So this is Preventing Behavior Problems Through Positive Parenting, and we're so glad that you are here with us. My name is Erica, and I'm a parent advisor at Matrix Parent Network and Resource Center. And I'll be presenting today with my coworker, Margaret, the senior parent advisor at Matrix. This presentation was developed by Linda Brault, and it was reviewed and approved by the California Department of Developmental Services. I think that is to say that it's based on data and research. You can be assured. And let's see, I just saw a quick question pop up. Let me just make sure that. So yeah, that's a good. So all of the PDF of this PowerPoint, it's in a PDF form, plus a number of other materials were sent in the same email where you got this Zoom link. So you should have access to everything. If you have any trouble with that, you can give us a call and we will connect you with the materials. Our goals for this session today are to provide information on children's behavior and social emotional development, to describe helpful tips for positive parenting that will help support this development and help to prevent challenging behaviors. And we'll also share some resources that may be helpful for you and let you know how you can reach Matrix if you would like more support. And I just want to take a moment to say that I would like you to invite you to be open to the suggestions and techniques that we discussed today. But please do not feel that you have to do a lot of things or make drastic changes. Parenting can be stressful, and this can be increased when your child has special needs, or for example, when there's a global pandemic. And we certainly do not want to add to your stress. So if you hear something today that makes sense to you, give it a try, but please don't go away with any sort of sense of pressure or that you have more things to do, because that would make me sad. So some expectations to help today go smoothly. These are pretty basic. They apply a little bit more to in-person, but certainly are good ideas in general. The one that is mentioned here that I was not familiar with when I first saw this presentation is the step up and step back. And this is the idea that if you are in a small group, for example, and you find that that you're doing a lot of sharing, then it might be time to step back and let someone else step up, and vice versa as well. Every child needs one person who is crazy about him or her. It's so important for every child to feel that someone enjoys them, has fun with them, and is crazy about them. And I was curious about this, the person who said this quote, and I looked them up, and they were a developmental psychologist who actually helped started the National Head Start program.
So, what is social and emotional development? And this is important to understand what exactly your child should be doing at certain ages. So, we're going to talk more about development, but basically, the definition we're using is the developmentally and culturally appropriate ability to experience, express, and manage emotions, and to establish positive, rewarding relationships with others. So it's the internal process that the child develops their own emotional well being and how to manage emotions, and the external of how they relate to other people. So the key word here is development. These skills develop over time, just like all other skills develop in children over time. Babies aren't born learning to read, and they learn to read at a certain age with the proper instruction. So social and emotional skills develop also as children age. And one of the things that helps a child develop, as we've just been talking about, is having a responsive, secure relationship. So responsive, someone who interacts with them, and secure, that they feel safe and nurtured. And just like with any other skill, not all children develop at the same rate. There are a lot of information you can access to say approximately what should be happening at an approximate age, but it does vary child to child. So it's not going to be the same in every child, and it is going to be dependent a little bit on the environment they're in, whether they have siblings, um, what's going on in the household, and that sort of thing. So we do have a couple of online resources linked to this video, and if you download the PDF, these links should be active, and you should be able to, just click on the link and get this information. Um, and I did go to this site, and it is a pretty thorough site that shows, um, on social and emotional development, what should be happening at various different ages, and it even gives you little videos of uh, how to look at this and how to think about different kinds of social emotional behavior at different ages. So it can be a very useful site to use. So now we're going to talk about positive parenting and what does that mean. And one of the things I said to Erica as we were preparing for this presentation is that it made me think back about my own parenting with a little bit of, oh gee, I should have done things differently sometimes. So don't let this put you on a guilt trip if you haven't been practicing some of these skills. This is just suggestions for how you might go forward in the future. So what is positive parenting? The family members using what they can control to raise children who are positive contributors to the family and to the community. Positive parenting focuses on raising adults, not children. And this is something that, seldom do you hear when your children are little, but what you're trying to do is to prepare them to be an adult. Just like school is really there to prepare children for what happens after they leave school. And sometimes we get so focused in the moment, we don't think of the long view and the big picture. And the final thing is being positive is not being a pushover. It doesn't mean just let your child do whatever they want, whenever they want. It really is a way of encouraging the appropriate behavior. So what does it involve? One of the things it involves is being encouraging and clear. And what does that mean? It focuses on staying calm, connecting deeply with your child, encouraging the desired behavior, and setting limits without shaming or punishing. And that's the hardest part of this, I think you'll realize. But one of the things we focus on a lot is staying calm and connecting. Those are the two traits of the positive parent. And sometimes you have to work on taking care of yourself so that you can stay calm and still stay connected. So if you are too overwhelmed and too busy all the time, it's hard to do this. So think about this as something you need to care for yourself as well in order to do a good job of being a positive parent, and take self-care seriously. it's not selfish. You should really take the time and effort you need to keep yourself in as much as possible, in a calm and nurturing place. We might want to control our child, but we can't really control them. And that's a hard concept to get through sometimes, but if you think about it, you can't really control what they do. What we can control is going to influence their child. And what are the things we can control? And it's our own behavior. We can influence how we ourselves behave towards them and towards other people. In our interactions with the child and other members of the family, and that's what they're seeing, and they're learning from seeing. So we can control those things. And we can control the strategies we try based on what we know about our child. So, we can present several strategies and you can control what you try out. Um, you don't have to try everything, but you can try something and see if it works. Characteristics we need. Well, again, this is a consistent, nurturing, emotionally responsible primary caregivers, which is, I believe, in this case, all of you. You're a primary caregiver, uh, and you're striving to be consistent and nurturing and emotionally responsive. It's important to have the characteristic of having learned a little bit about child development. That's why we gave you the link to that other site. Um, to view the child's behavior as an expression of how the child copes with the world. And what we're trying to do is to get them to cope in an appropriate way. But all of us need means of coping with everything going on around us. And children are experiencing the world as a new and sometimes scary environment. The acceptance of the urgency of a young child's needs. They always want everything right away, and that's sometimes puts a lot of demands on the parent. Uh, and you may look at something and say, oh, that's not important right now. To them, it's very urgent, and having an understanding of their feeling of urgency. Um, and as we've talked about, an emotionally balanced caregiver. And part of this is making the world predictable to the child. You don't want the child to be confused by having inconsistent responses to their behavior. You want them to sort of know how you're going to respond when they behave in certain ways. And part of understanding development and social emotional development is just a tiny bit of information about the brain. And so I'm going to let, I think
Yep.
Erica's going to explain that.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the brain. To understand behavior, it can help to have some basic knowledge of how the brain works. And this is a rough diagram of what is in your brain's various lobes and centers. The things that happen automatically, like breathing, your heartbeat, and some emotional reactions, happen in what we can think of as the downstairs brain. So that's the two sections at the bottom. Our higher level thinking occurs in our upstairs brain, which is often called our executive center, or people do refer to that as the cortex. We're going to hear a little bit about Dr. Dan Siegel. So he's written several books for parenting, including The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline. And he also has a great way to help us understand our brain. So he came up with describing our brain as having the upstairs and the downstairs. And the upstairs is where our logical and rational thinking happen. And the downstairs is where our life-sustaining activities happen. We don't have to think about breathing. We don't have to think about making our heart beat. And this is also where our emotional reactions occur, including our fight, flight, freeze response. And what is interesting is that the upstairs brain is the last to develop. In fact, many of the important functions like impulse control and problem solving don't develop fully until we are young adults in our mid-20s. So I'm going to show you a video of Dr. Siegel using his hand model of the brain to help us understand how our brains work.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child, and that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
So we're going to make a fist with your thumb tucked inside, and our thumb is the emotional brain, the brainstem and the limbic system, and the fingers represent the rational brain or the cerebral cortex. So like you said, that's your higher thinking that then is controlling and overlaying some management on the emotional reactive brain. And then like you said, in a stressful situation, like somebody cuts you off on the freeway, you might flip your lid. And we'll talk more about how the idea is that, techniques to be able to bring that back down, and then also sort of integrating some things almost into more of an automatic response. So when you flip your lid, you're not in your upstairs thinking brain, you're in that downstairs brain, the emotional center where you're just reacting, you're in reaction mode. And this can happen during difficult times with your child. You may become upset and flip your lid. Your child may be flipping their lid too, and their lid is not even fully developed as it is. So before you can access and process your knowledge and logic, you need to reconnect your upstairs and your downstairs brain.
And I know that I flipped my lid a few times with my kids. So it's not trying to make you feel guilty about this. It's really just trying to give yourself tools to think about how to get back into that calm and consistent place and flexible place that you want to be with your child.
It explains how you can sort of lose your ability to think clearly when you're upset. So this model helps also to explain why one of the best strategies that we can use for helping with our children's behavior is to stay calm ourselves. When we're calm, our whole brain is ready for action. We can access our upstairs rational brain. But easier said than done, right? Staying calm is not always easy. And this took me a little while to understand what's happening here. But this is an elevator that's being repaired, and it has a sign on the elevator door that says, "You'd be cranky too if people pushed your buttons all day." It's especially hard to stay calm when people are pushing our buttons. So try to learn what pushes your buttons and have some ideas for ways to act instead of reacting. So our children are especially good at knowing which of their behaviors push our buttons. That's kind of one of their specialties. And we can probably all think of things that our child or children do that push our buttons. But have you ever noticed that what bothers you isn't even seen as a problem by someone else, even a spouse or a close friend? And it's actually useful that we don't all have the same buttons. That means that we can help each other out. Figuring out what pushes our buttons can help us be ready when it happens so that we can take a breath and stay calm. We can predict it a little bit. Then we can act from our upstairs brain instead of reacting from the downstairs brain. And now we're moving on to you, back to you, Margaret.
So, so here is the question. Are you looking for blame or are you looking for solutions? So when we focus on blame, we're really staying in that flipped lid state and can't access our thinking brain. So, what we want to do is to stay in that upstairs cerebral cortex part of our thinking brain, and that's where solutions are going to be found. They're not going to be found in your brainstem, they're going to be found in your executive functioning, higher thinking part of your brain. So staying calm is the step that allows you to access that problem solving part of your brain. We're going to go through some practical tips for parents of young children with challenging behavior. So I'm presuming that most of you came here because you have some challenges with your child's behavior. So we're just going to go through these one by one, and you can go back and review them if you like from the PDF.
And like we said at the beginning, for small children, but it's certainly applicable in a variety of situations.
So there is a handout on the tips from Positive Solutions for Families. There are resources at the end of this handout that have websites you can use, and there's many good books and websites. You do have to use a little caution when you're accessing things on the internet, as you know, because there's a lot of misinformation as well as information. But the end of this slideshow, there are some suggestions of some books and things that have been vetted and that you might want to access. So, tip one, keep your expectations realistic. And this is partly why we've talked about development, because you need to have some idea of what your child is able to do at different ages and not put expectations on them that are unrealistic given their age and their developmental state. So learn a little bit about what to expect at different ages. And one thing I found helpful when my kids were in preschool, for example, was as a parent of, especially with my first child, what is normal? And the preschool teachers saw hundreds of kids, and they had a better sense of what was normal than I did. So, if there are other people around, if you have parents who've, raised you and other children, aunts and uncles, caregivers that you work with, sometimes as well as accessing this information online, just talking to people with more experience in parenting can be really helpful. You can also get a lot of bad advice that way too, so you have to sort of filter what's helpful and what isn't. So you learn about what's typical development at different ages and thinking about how your child has acted in similar situations. So when you think about that, you can think about what could be a problem in public that isn't a problem at home. If your child likes to run around and yell a lot, maybe that's not a problem at home, but it can be a problem if you are, on the road and have to stop at a restaurant for a meal and, your child's bored from sitting in the car and then all of a sudden has a chance to run around and scream. So things that are problem behaviors in one situation are not in another, but when you know how your child is likely to respond, that allows you to prepare and think about how to cope with the same behavior in a different situation.
Our next tip is plan ahead. One great outcome of having realistic expectations is that you can plan ahead. So, for example, if you know that your child is in a throwing stage and you're going to grandma's house, and grandma's got maybe coasters on the table that are very appealing for throwing, maybe you can plan ahead and maybe ask grandma to put the coasters away, or bring some soft balls and know a safe place to throw them in the yard or at the park. That's the idea, planning ahead. And you can also have your children come up with ideas. And then they really own it because they came up with that idea on their own. Older children especially like to plan ahead. If you know that you're going to the dentist office and there's going to be a long wait, you can ask your child what things that they would like to take along to stay entertained. Some families have created a special traffic bag that that they use for if they're getting possibly stuck in traffic. They have it in case they get stuck in traffic. That has some books they haven't read in a while, a puppet, some snacks that only come out if there's a traffic delay. And when I read this tip, I thought, well, I remember times when this would happen. Now, if you don't clean your car out very often, this may accumulate on its own. My kids would periodically rediscover a little compartment in the back of the minivan or the seat back pockets that would have a book that hadn't been read in a while. I don't think that's quite what we're getting at here, but yeah, so planning ahead and involving your kids in that as well is our tip number 2. And I think we're ready for the next one.
So, and this is where you have to think about the fact that your child doesn't automatically know what you expect of them. You have to tell them, and you have to tell them clearly. So you want to know, think about what you want your child to do and state it clearly to them. It's an important idea, and we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about this. And part of this is thinking about saying what you want them to do, not what you want them not to do. So you're putting everything in the positive. And here's an example. In a gift store, a parent of a young child says, "That's right, hands in your pocket, look with your eyes." As they walk by, as you walk by things that you don't want your child reaching out and touching. So you're telling them what to do, not what not to do. You're not saying don't touch. You're saying keep your hands in your pocket, look with your eyes. So you're telling them what they can do, not what they can't do. And that is a clearer instruction to the child than don't touch anything. So you're thinking more of what you expect your child to do and telling them what you expect than setting rules. So kids tend to focus on what they call the main road words or the action words rather on the do not, stop, don't words. Um, so if you say don't run into the street, they focus on the word street. If you say stay on the sidewalk, they focus on the sidewalk. So trying to put things into the positive, what they should do or can do rather than using the words don't and stop all the time. Another important aspect is to show them and demonstrate and model what you want them to do. So you can demonstrate to them that, when they're in a place where they shouldn't be touching things, you can show them what it is to look with your eyes, and you might even demonstrate that your hands are in your pocket or your arms are folded, and you can demonstrate that to the child. Fold your hands, look with your eyes. Um, and state it clearly and simply, because the child can't uh, process a long list of things that people tell them all the time. So keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it positive. And uh, then the trick is to follow up with positive feedback. And we'll talk more about that later. But basically, you know, when you see them doing what they're doing, what you want them to do, say, "Oh, I see you keeping your hands in your pocket. I see you looking with your eyes." So, it's good to let them know that you're seeing and appreciating their behavior when it's the appropriate behavior. Um, when we're telling our child what our expectations of them are, you can put it in the framework that these are behaviors expected of everybody in your house, whether it's other children, if you have older kids, your parents, yourselves, uh, aunts and uncles, everybody in the household has certain expectations of what kind of behaviors that we want to see. And common expectations are: we are respectful, we are safe and healthy, we are kind, and we help one another. Um, and these expectations can be carried out in different ways at different times. Um, so you can think about this. You can think about what kind of rules you have in your household, and you might think of them more as expectations, and see if you can connect these to one of these uh, things on the list, expectations that you have expressed for your whole family. And we're going to go through a few examples. So you need to provide examples so the child understands what this expectation means. So if you have an expectation that our family is friendly and kind, you say, being friendly and kind is sharing with your siblings. Let your sister take a turn with the book. Uh, Help mommy set the table. These are things that are kind to one another. Our family is respectful. And, one of the things that's respectful is asking to use something that belongs to somebody else rather than simply grabbing it. Our family is safe and healthy. Going to bed on time is a healthy practice. Um, we help one another. We help clean up. And so you can think of some examples here of how you can set a framework of a few expectations and then explain how a particular behavior fits into that framework. And that gives you a structure for expressing these um, behaviors to your child, expressing these expectations to your child, and explaining to them how their behavior fits into this model.
Okay, tip number 4, we're going to talk about choices. And think for a moment what it would be like if you were never given a choice. Children have very little real power, but starting with their first no, they get a little taste of power. If you give them opportunities to experience power by choosing reasonable choices between reasonable choices, this may satisfy that need for power. For example, you may not let them choose whether they want to have broccoli or applesauce with their dinner, but you might let them choose which they want to have first. That being said, beware of the false choice. Have you ever found yourself saying, "Do you want to come inside now?" when really the child is going to need to come inside? So this isn't a real choice. Sometimes we might even say, "It's time to come inside. Okay?" which again provides a false choice. Not coming inside is not really a choice. So you can provide a clear statement and then offer a secondary choice, such as, it's time to come inside now. Do you want to carry in your toy cars, or would you like me to carry them in? And I guess I would just add on to that, just sort of thinking through as you're giving the choices, is it really okay with me if they choose either one?
Yeah.
Just to check in with yourself. So if, you know, you're having trouble getting ready to go out to the park, and maybe you're really yourself looking forward to going to the park, maybe you don't want to say, you know, if you can't get your shoes on, then we're not going to the park, or you can't go to the park. Maybe you want to think about what the choices are so that you're really okay with either one, because then your emotions are taken out of it.
So we're now going to talk about using when then statements. And I remember when I was taking parenting classes years ago, it was given as the if then statement. And this is actually putting it into a little bit more positive context, because if means it may or may not ever happen. When is expressing the expectation that something will happen. Um, and so, and when then statement is, when you put on your shoes, then you can play with your friend. Um, First put on your jacket, then we can go outside. So it's expressing the expectation that something's going to happen, and saying when it happens, then we can get on to whatever is next or more fun. I'll just tell a little story that before I had kids, my brother had children before I did, and I noticed that one of my eldest niece would always sort of throw a little fit when she was told it was time to get dressed. And they had a lot of problems getting her to get dressed and get her shoes on and get out of the house in the morning. And I noticed when I was visiting with my mom and my mom was taking care of my niece, she never threw those fits. It was, she put on her shoes and went. And I said to my mom, how come, why is this that she behaves so much better for you? And she said, well, I have the luxury of time. And she knows that. So she knows we're not going out until she puts on her shoes. And so she has no power over me. And she said, with your brother and sister-in-law, they have to get to work in the morning. They have to get her dressed and get her to daycare. And they don't have that luxury of just saying, oh, whenever you do this, then we can go, because they have to go. So sometimes being able to carry out these positive uh, suggestions is a little bit dependent on your schedule, and you really have to use your thinking part of your brain to come up with a solution that allows these kinds of, uh, of tips to actually work. So you have to put the
Margaret,
expectation in such a way, or provide something that they want to 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 get the win to happen sooner. But it is a good idea, but it does sometimes take a little effort to figure out how to make this work. When you're using the when then statements, giving it a positive focus, that's always, it's always a challenge for us to think of things in, what you want them to do rather than what you don't want them to do. Um, and State it only once. Here's another thing: setting a reasonable time limit, following through, and being prepared for your child's response, especially if it's no. Um, what are you uh, going to do if the answer is no? So, follow through. What does follow through mean? It means that if the first task doesn't happen, the second thing doesn't happen. So, if you say, when you put your jacket on, we will go outside. The follow through means that you say, if you didn't put on your jacket, so we will stay inside. So this is, you're giving them a choice of two things that are acceptable. And then if the first thing you ask doesn't happen, you follow through by not having the second thing happen. Uh, and this doesn't work if the second task is not something your child wants to do. Um, for example, if you said, when your pajamas on, then we can go to bed. That only works if your child loves going to bed. If your child doesn't want to go to bed, this isn't going to get you any place. And so you have to hold out something more enjoyable, like, when you put your pajamas on, then we can read your bedtime story. And think of something they want for the them statement, not something they don't want. Um, and a time limit. This is something that you can do for older children. Um, you can say, for example, when you put your pajamas on, then we could read a story, and I'll check back in a few minutes to see if your pajamas on. So we will see if there is enough time left to read a story. So you can set a time limit for an older child. You know, think about whether your child is old enough to understand, what a few minutes means, what 5 minutes means. Um, if they're too young to understand that, this isn't going to be helpful. And the other thing to be really careful about is, don't seem like you're negotiating with your child. Um, and this is where we've gotten out of the if then statements. Like, if you put on your jacket, then you can go outside. It's less clear than when you put on your jacket, then you can go outside, because it takes away the idea that you're negotiating whether or not something can happen. It's really an expectation that something will happen.
Okay, catch your child being good. We're going to spend some time on this tip. Do you ever find yourself looking for trouble, meaning that you're commenting more or noticing more when your child is doing something unacceptable? Sometimes even if your child has been too quiet, you might suspect that they're doing something wrong, which you might be right. And yet when they're doing the right thing and behaving well, we don't always remember to remark on it. One of the best ways to increase behavior is to notice it and comment on it. And if we do that with positive behavior, we may happily see more of that behavior. Children are not born knowing what is acceptable or unacceptable. So when we notice and comment on good behavior, especially if we use descriptive language that really can get their attention, then we're teaching them what behavior to use. So catching your child being good is a great way to change behavior. What behavior do we want? Now we're going to do an activity that uses the handout, Catch Me Being Good. Oh, we have it right here. You can just look at it. This can help us to focus on what we want our child to do so that we can look for that behavior and comment on it. First, you will think of some behaviors that you may not want your child to do. And then you'll think of the behavior that you want to see instead. So we'll look at these examples. These are some common issues that come up and some ideas for the acceptable behavior that you may want instead. Notice that the behavior you want is usually something that's easy to see and probably happens occasionally just on its own. So I'm going to go through these. So for example, if the behavior you don't want is hitting your sister, the behavior you want is playing cooperatively. And what you might say then when you see that positive behavior, that desired behavior, is, you are playing so nicely with your sister. You gave her a turn with your car. So you're kind of verbalizing what you've seen happening and remarking on it as positive. Another example of a behavior you might not want is running in the house with food. The behavior you want is walking or sitting while eating. How you might be able to comment on that when you see it happening is, look at you sitting while you eat. You look so safe and comfortable. Or, you carried that plate of food so carefully from the kitchen to the table. Another example of a challenging behavior would be screaming to get what you want, or screaming to get what she wants. And the behavior that you want to see is your child showing you what she wants. So sometimes you might notice and comment on this would be, wow, you pointed at the refrigerator. You must want something inside. Let's go look together. Or, when you raise your arms up, I know that you want me to pick you up. That's wonderful. Now that you have a desired behavior to look for, you can take that step of catching them being good. And that's when you comment and acknowledge that desired behavior. Okay, so we're going to the next slide. We're still staying on this same topic. So the next slide is being intentional. So this is a little bit more just about this idea of catching your child being good. So this could be something new to you, and it can be really powerful. Being intentional and acknowledging your child's appropriate behavior will influence them much more than correcting them or commenting on what they shouldn't be doing. And we have a few thoughts on praise versus acknowledgement here. Praise can tend to increase external motivation, while acknowledgement and encouragement can build internal motivation. So the praise would be, it makes me happy when you share toys with your little sister. You're a terrific big brother. And the acknowledgement is, you are really working hard at sharing with your little sister. You're a terrific big brother. You can see how the second one, the acknowledgement, it's acknowledging the work that the child is doing, and it puts it on them. The acknowledgement puts it more in their lap rather than that it's something that's being done to make you happy. So it can be almost the same thing, but it gives a little more credit to the child. And research shows that this type of commenting is very helpful in changing behavior and helping children learn. So positive descriptive acknowledgement, it puts the focus on exactly what the child is doing, and it hopefully becomes their internal voice. So instead of thinking something like, I'm a good job, because they've heard so much, oh, good job, they think I'm a good job. Instead, they think, I know how to share. I'm a terrific big brother. So we're going to talk about using positive feedback and encouragement. So words are not the only way to encourage your child. In fact, your child is aware of his or her challenging behavior. If they're aware and they're struggling to change, you might want to set up a signal so that you can give encouragement wherever you are and whatever they're doing. And I was just talking the other day to my aunt, who was a kindergarten teacher for many, many years and so wise. And we were talking about this sort of thing, and she was saying how she would have a signal with some of her students when she was working with them, that would just be a nonverbal signal. So some sort of a hand signal or something that they would agree on beforehand. So then the child kind of got to have that special feeling of having a signal with the teacher. It could be also with their parent. And then she could, give them a positive signal when they were doing something good. So an example would be a child who often grabs toys from a younger sibling they might be really trying to use their words to trade. You can let them know that you have noticed how hard they're working when you see them using their words and asking for trades, and you can give them a thumbs up, and then watching carefully so that you have that opportunity to give the thumbs up. One mother, there's a story here that one mother noticed that her 4-year-old spent a lot of time tattling on his 5-year-old brother. And he really changed when she started focusing and commenting on appropriate behavior. she realized that her 4-year-old had been telling her what he thought was important, all the negative behavior that she usually commented on. And when she shifted to noticing positive behavior, then he started reporting that to her too. And our next slide is on emotional deposits. Part of positive parenting is paying attention to your child's emotional piggy bank. So you can imagine that your child has a piggy bank in front of them and that you need to make deposits in it. And the fuller your child's piggy bank is, the easier it will be when you have to ask them to do something difficult, like coming to the dinner table when they're in the middle of playing or waiting quietly while you finish talking on the phone. Children really respond so well to our time and attention. In fact, that is the one thing that they want most. And that's because their brains need adult attention and interaction in order to grow and learn. So you could even say that getting our attention is their job. The idea that we can give more attention to them when things are calm and going well helps us to give them enough deposits to handle the times when we can't give them the attention right then. And we're going to give an example of a fun activity. So for this, this can work especially with older children, to decorate a lunch bag, or you could have a basket or whatever container is fun for you. Could even be a piggy bank that you can easily get things out of. So you would have slips of paper that you can use to actually have a visual of making an emotional deposit. So on the paper, you would write down the person's name, your compliments or encouragements, things that you appreciate about this person in your family. If the child can't draw or write their own, then they could dictate theirs to an older child or to an adult. And everyone can put these papers in the bag and read them once a week or more often at dinner or breakfast or sometime when you're together. Getting your attention is their job. One of the easiest ways to build relationships with children is by giving them time and attention. It is important to them. Children want to have adults spend time with them. When they're born, all they can do is wait for an adult to do something. They're like this picture of this little baby right there, just waiting for the adults around them to do something. They're not like little turtles that hatch and scoot straight out to sea to start life on their own. Newborn humans are completely helpless and they need our time and attention in order to survive. It's a matter of survival. We are how they learn and they can't do it without us. That being said, individuals have different levels of need for attention. Everyone has an attention tank, like a gas tank. Some are smaller, some are larger, and children will fill their tanks with attention one way or another, whether it's positive or negative. And some children will try to get attention through their challenging behavior. Try to pay attention to when they are not engaged in challenging behaviors, so that you're not just reinforcing the negative. And if you find yourself thinking, she needs so much attention, try to remind yourself that getting adult attention is a child's job. They learn through interaction. So if getting your attention is their job, we can ask ourselves, what does she want my attention for? What they really want from attention. So here's some ideas of what your child might be looking for. They might be looking for connection. This is a very common reason for attention-seeking behavior. We can reassure our child that we are still their connection, even if we have to do another task. For example, you can try this during that phone call, letting them sit next to you and maybe have an activity next to you while you're talking on the phone, so they can maybe feel enough of that connection without interrupting the phone call. They may just want interaction. We are social beings, and they may be looking for someone to interact with. And other children may not be as much fun as we are. Plus, as adults, we stimulate their brains and they want to learn. They may want help. They may be telling us, I don't know how to do this. This can be, getting a toy to work or opening a container, but it can also be less substantive things like they don't know how to start playing with a sibling or they don't know what to do next. And then there can be times when the child just wants you to look at me, look at me.
So now we are going to the seventh tip, and this is one of the hardest. So staying calm. Staying calm is easy if you're well rested, not in a hurry, and feeling good yourself. But that is not always the case. So, it can really be helpful to find things that you can do to get calm when you need to get calm. Some people do the deep breathing exercises. Some count to 10. Some find a saying they can repeat to themselves, like, as Erica suggested, I'm the adult. I can do this. Or step away from the edge, get calm. So think about things you can say to yourself, or if you're into meditation or deep breathing, think about what you can do you have to do it fairly quickly, but for a minute or two to get yourself to that calm state so that you can respond to the child not being calm with your being calm and seeming to be in control. Deep breaths are a great strategy because it brings oxygen to our brain, which is what it needs. It needs oxygen to keep us from flipping the lid, so to speak. So, we can try this if you want. You breathe slowly and deeply in through your nose, and then breathe out slowly through your mouth. And then try it again. In through your nose, out through your mouth, like blowing a bubble. And I hope you notice that making you feel more calm. Hopefully you're not too overstressed at the moment, so maybe you're not noticing the difference, but it is something you can try, and it should help. But come up with a strategy that works for you, something that you can do for yourself so that you can stay in control, model the appropriate behavior, and take care of your child in an appropriate manner.
So our last tip is using neutral time. The same concept of practicing when you don't need the skill is true with children as well. So if you're trying to help your child learn to be gentle, for example, with a new kitten that you might be getting, it's easier to practice those gentle touches on a stuffed animal or even on your arm before the kitten is there. With practice during that neutral time, when your child is in their thinking brain, they can take in that information. Then when the real kitten is there and there's so much excitement that there's a little bit of a flipped lid, that they can still reconnect with their experiences and their practice that they had during that upstairs brain time. I think that is so important, and it really makes sense with the brain concepts that we talked about. And that is our final tip. And Margaret, you just have a few things to share as we wrap.
So one thing to take note of is we have been basically talking about behavior strategies that work with what we might call the typically developing child, not children necessarily with disabilities. So what do you do if you find yourself doing the right appropriate things with your child and you still have challenging behaviors and you're concerned about it because they don't seem to be within the normal range of what you would expect of a child at a particular age? So the first thing you would do is talk to your family doctor, and if necessary, get them to refer you to a pediatric specialist, to get some consultation on whether this behavior is normal and what it might indicate. You can also ask for an assessment from the regional center or from your school district. So not everybody knows about regional centers. Regional centers are set up in every region of the state of California. Um, we're most familiar with Golden Gate and North Bay regional centers because that's the area we've served for a long time. But there's the Far North uh, regional center. There's an East Bay regional center. So there's a regional center any place you might be, and you can Google them and find the appropriate one. They provide a program called Early Start for children between the ages of 0 and 3 that have developmental delays. And if you have a young child in that age range, um, probably before 2.5, because by the time they're 2.5, you're sort of looking for the next step. But if you think your child has something else going on, if you suspect they might be on the spectrum or have other issues about development, um, maybe have an intellectual delay, you can ask for an assessment from the regional center and they will assess the child and determine whether they are eligible for specialized services. Um, if your child is a little older, 3 years old, you can ask for the same kind of assessment from your school district, especially if your child uh, is going to school and the behaviors are problematic at school. This would especially be the case. But remember that children at 3 years old are eligible for special education if they fit into an eligibility category. And there are special education preschools that are public and free to parents from the age of 3. So if your child does qualify for specialized education, they may qualify for a special ed preschool and attendant services such as occupational therapy, speech therapy, and behavior therapy. So those are things to think about if you think your child has fairly serious behavior problems that don't respond to typical good parenting. And if you have questions about any of these things, you can call us. We do have a helpline that we respond to calls 9 to 2 Monday through Thursday. And you can leave a message anytime and we'll call you back. So if you have questions about any of this, please don't hesitate to give us a call. This next slide talks about children with an IFSP. That stands for Individualized Family Service Plan. And this is what you would get if your child is eligible for the Early Start program. You would work with the regional center to develop the individual family service plan. And if you have such a plan already, but you develop some concerns about your child's behavior, you might want to talk with your service provider and see if you can find a program that's available to you and to them that could help with these behaviors. And you might not qualify for specialized services in the social emotional area, but it's always good to find out what can be made available. And it says this Family Resource Center can also help, and we are a Family Resource Center as well. So again, you can call us for some suggestions. What if your child does not qualify for an IFSP and in this area of social emotional development? What else should you be looking at? Well, one is your private insurance company may have some services available, so you should always check. I know we all get frustrated with insurance companies, but you'd be surprised sometimes you can get approved to have some kind of program. Certainly, if your child has a diagnosis of autism, you would be behavior therapy would be something that should be made available through your insurance. But there may be other programs. I know Kaiser has programs for children with various behavior issues. There are many community centers that provide programs. So look around, and again, we might be able to help, locate something for you or help you figure out what might be available. And then parent education support groups. You might find one. We're hoping to set up more support groups in the future. We don't have any available through Matrix right now, but we do have a person who's setting up such programs. So hopefully in the near future, we will be able to provide you with more support groups. But there are support groups out there now, and there are things that might help that are, everybody's meeting online now. So you can search, for example, on CHAD is Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Disorder. And they have support groups, and maybe it's not in your locale, but if they're meeting by Zoom, you could still attend. So think about looking around for support groups. We have a list of support groups on our website. It's unfortunately not terribly extensive, but do check it out, and we can try to help locate a support group for you. We do have online Facebook groups that you can participate in that might be helpful to you. Locally, first of all, we are a parent training and information center. We also are a family resource center and a family empowerment center. You can call us. As I mentioned, we have this helpline. The number is 800-578-2592. You can find that on our website also. We do operate primarily 9 to 2 Monday through Thursday, but if you're working during those times, you need a call back later in the day, let us know that, and we can attempt to arrange that. Some of our parent advisors don't have kids at home and are a little more flexible in their scheduling. We have a website, www.matrixparents.org. You probably already were on that, signing up for this with this training session, but we have lots and lots of information packets on that website, and so there's a lot you can access there, including that is where this video will be posted eventually. And also, if you need to contact your regional center, here is the website, but you can find it fairly easily just by Googling California regional centers, and you will find them even if you don't have this specific URL to guide you. But in the PDF that you get of this presentation, these links should be live, and so hopefully you will be able to access these things. Learning more about temperament. So temperament traits are things that each of us are born with, like how active we are, how intensely we respond to things, our different biological rhythms and these sorts of things. And these can really influence the behaviors we have. For example, if you have a child that is highly active, you've probably noticed that they have a lot of difficulty sitting through things. If this is you, and many of these traits run in families, of course, if you are one of those people who's highly active, you've probably figured out over time how to sit through a meeting by wiggling your foot or chewing gum, you doodle during the meeting or something of that sort. Young children with an active temperament will just get up and run around, and they haven't yet learned to manage these internal messages and figure out appropriate ways they can deal with their need for activity. So, it's something that we have to help them figure out and learn. There was a study done a few years ago that compared parents' concerns about behavior in their children when they had been educated about temperament and when they did not receive this information. And the findings were pretty clear. Parents who understood temperament had fewer concerns and fewer complaints about their child's behavior. And this was especially true when they understood how their temperament interacted with that of the child. Um, so it's important to get an understanding of your child's temperament. And this is an area where there are many resources that you can access right away. And we have some of them listed here. Again, these should be live links in your PDF. And if for any reason you have trouble getting the live link, they're at least spelled out for you here. And so, please don't hesitate to do this. And you can also check again with your insurance agent. I know Kaiser has done temperament studies from time to time. And so, you may be able to get help from professionals, or you may be able to just access some of this information online and learn more about your child's individual temperament. Handle with Care is a brochure about choosing childcare, especially when your child has challenging behaviors. And it has tips of what to look for and what kind of practices and what kind of programs they have. And so this is something that you can access that might be helpful to you if you're having trouble finding childcare for a temperamental child. So with that, we're going to start to come to a conclusion here, and I wanted to give you this basic quote that I think is helpful. And basic to thinking about parenting is the strong realization that there is absolutely no one right way to raise kids. Children are totally unique. Parental experiences and values are distinctive, and the partners coming together for child rearing create a specific particular environment. And we want you to realize that parenting consists largely of some common sense, some flexibility, and a sense of humor to hold it all together, along with a lot of making it up as you go along and hoping towards the future. There are many right ways to parent, and I hope you have some ideas to take home with you to help you have more fun and a more positive experience with your child.